Hey everyone, it's Kraft here. A bit of a different video today. I know I said I'd be doing the Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne episode of Play a Real Shin Megami Tensei game, and that is still coming, I promise, honest, it is. I've just been really busy with like E3 and work and this video, which is actually just a edited recording of a panel that I did for this year's 2021 PersonaCon. I had a lot of fun doing it. I think it probably could have turned out a little better. I have had a cold the last few days. I've still got a little bit of it, and I feel like that probably messed up with it a little bit. But yeah, I'm still pretty happy with how it turned out. And I'd like to thank all the con organisers for giving me the chance to do this. It was definitely a lot of fun and a good learning experience. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. It is a special episode talking about the Persona 1 manga opposed to the game, so that'll be interesting, hopefully. Cool. Well then, on that note, I guess we should begin. Hello everyone, my name is Kraftium, or just Kraft, and this is my panel, where we'll be having a look at the Megami Inbunroku Persona manga. Sorry in advance if I sound a little bit scratchy, I have had a cold for the last few days. Now, first of all, who am I? I'm a content creator on YouTube. I've been making various reviews and videos on YouTube about like JRPGs, reviews and like analysis and video essays and the such. Since about September last year, it's definitely been fun, but one of the things that I've been doing as part of that is my Play a Real Shin Megami Tensei game series, which I started to encourage myself more than anything to actually go through my backlog, since I bought a bunch of them on sale and just never ever got around to playing them. So I wanted to try and encourage myself, because I'd play like maybe 3 or 4 hours and be like, oh wow, this is a lot more intimidating than I thought it would be, and then I'd usually end up dropping it. So yeah, that's why I started, and basically the idea is me getting myself to play them whilst also trying to encourage people to play others. I've covered Soul Hackers, Persona 5 Strikers, since Persona games are a spin-off of Shin Megami Tensei, so I do count them. And I'll be doing Nocturne in the next couple of weeks or so. I've been, unfortunately, having to put it off a bunch of times between like this and E3 and whatnot. But yeah, basically what counts as an SMT game really is... I'm very loose with the term, but basically, as long as attack spells and skills like Agi and Mabufala and Zeodyne all exist, I count it. As long as I can Megidoli on someone, I'm happy. But so today, we'll be doing a very special episode, because instead we'll be doing a Read a Real Shin Megami Tensei game, where I'll be covering the Persona 1 manga. The Persona 1, I mean, you probably all know a lot of this information already, but released in 1996, a very early title for the PlayStation 1, and is actually a spiritual successor and kind of a very loose sequel to Shin Megami Tensei If for the Super Nintendo. And the whole idea of Personas were inspired by JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Shin Megami Tensei If similarly had things like Personas called Guardians that weren't quite the same, but like you can really see the origins of where Persona came from there. And it was actually what I wanted to start with when I started like trying to get into Persona. I originally discovered Persona 4 Arena behind the counter at a game, which is the equivalent, the UK equivalent of like a GameStop, and I saw the limited edition with a vinyl, and was like, oh, that game must have good music. And then later on went to my brother's house when he was at uni and discovered that he had it despite not knowing what Persona was, and we played it together. And Arena sat on my iPod like playlist for quite a while. But then, yeah, I was like, oh, I'll get into the Persona. Like, this is clearly 4. Like, I'll get in with 1. And then I looked at it and was unfortunately very put off by its like first-person dungeon crawling, which is why I ended up finding out that the manga existed and I started it. Unfortunately, the manga, when I got into the series, well, I was trying to get into the series, had not been fully translated yet. So, so I couldn't really get into it, and then I moved on to Persona 3 FES, because that was definitely the easier route to get into the series. Now, the Persona 1 manga started publication a few months after the game came out. I think only like 3 or 4 months. It was surprisingly came out very quickly after the fact, and went on for 4 years until it finished in the year 2000. It was written by Shinshu Ueda, probably butchering that name, and had 8 volumes. She previously worked on manga adaptations of Majin Tensei, and also later worked on her own original SMT manga known as Shin Megami Tensei Gaiten Hato no Senki. Unfortunately, both of those only have the Majin Tensei manga, I believe, has 5 volumes, and only the first has been translated or like scanlated by fans into English. There are raws of the first 3 volumes online, but they've not been, unfortunately, translated into English. And then same with Gaiten, that has 3 volumes and only the first one has actually been translated. But yeah, hopefully somebody can work on those in the future, because it would be cool. Now, first off, before we really get into talking about everything, I am gonna just give a brief overview of all the characters. I'll be it's still relevant to the manga, but we won't be going into the specific manga side of things for a little bit. But this is a general kind of review and overlook of Persona 1 as well as the manga. So I just feel like it'd make it a lot easier to explain everything about the cast and characters in the story, or everything I will be explaining. I don't want to give too much away because of spoilers, and the whole point of this is to introduce it to you guys. But yeah, I'll be doing that. We'll start off with Naoya Todo. He is the protagonist of Persona 1. In the game, he is simply referred to as the boy with the earring, and that's really his only personality trait in the games. He doesn't really say an awful lot, and anytime he does say stuff, it's literally just a yes or no dialogue prompt for the most part. His involvement in the narrative in the game is very small. The only real involvement he has is that he is another character who is important to the plot's childhood friend, and that's Maki, and that he is a natural leader. However, he is a bit more fleshed out in the manga, but we will get to that in a bit later. Next is Maki, who I mentioned just now. She isn't the protag of the game, but she definitely feels like she kind of is, since she is very integral to the main route through the story, being the Sebek route, because there is 2 routes through Persona 1. Her general deal is that she has she's got a very weak constitution and is in and out the hospital a lot of the time, and unfortunately can't really live a normal life because of that, and is very resentful for it. Fairly early on in the story, the gang all go and see her in the hospital, and after disappearing suddenly, various demons sort of start appearing in the hospital and around the city, and then she later ends up reappearing and is perfectly healthy and is really upbeat. But at the same time, a lot of something about her memories is kind of off. With when people start talking to her, there's things she doesn't remember and things she does remember that nobody else does, and obviously she's suddenly all better and has no memory of her illness beforehand. So that's definitely one of the game's mysteries. Next, we have Masao Inaba, or Mark as he's called. He's a character that a lot of people are fairly familiar with, as Mark is the one who, in the original PlayStation 1 release, notoriously, or infamously rather, they made him black to try and increase diversity, but they changed the entire cast to they changed hair colors and stuff to make them blonde and pretended that the game was in America. In general, he's a very he's like a sort of gold-hearted delinquent. He's a well-natured troublemaker and a bit of a class clown, who is very he loves his mom. He's not aggressive or like Kanji is in Persona 4, but he definitely has certain similarities to Kanji in general. One of the things that about his personality is that he is a graffiti artist, and he's often in trouble with the police because of it. He actually has a crush on Maki. It's one of the main things that crops up quite often throughout the game with him. And happens to only have been one of the only people in the class to actually regularly visit her in the hospital. Even the main character is implied to have not visited over that time, despite being childhood friends. In general, he's a very easygoing and free-spirited free-spirited sort of character, which causes him to often get in arguments with the next character, being Kei Nanjo, or just Nanjo in general. Nanjo is he's got a bit of a stick up his arse. He is very stuck up and kind of snobby. He looks down on everyone around him. He is the heir to his family name, the Nanjo Group, which small Easter egg that is in Persona 3 is when when you meet Mitsuru's dad, he has like one line where he mentions that the Kirijo Group was originally part of the Nanjo Group, and they branched off, and that's like one of those few connections that 3 onwards kind of have to the first 2 Persona games. So I thought that was quite a neat, interesting little thing. His character-wise, he is very much that sort of very classic, noble, rich kid style archetype. He calls I forget the precise term he uses, but he does refer to other to the other class modes. It was like the commoners or like riff. I forget the specific word he uses, but yeah, the number 1 on his giant ass cravat is supposed to symbolize that he wants to be Nippon Ichi, number 1 in Japan. He starts out really cold-hearted, as you'd expect from the archetype. Over the course of the games, he does have his butler, Yamaoka. I do have a picture somewhere in an alternate tab because I forgot to put it in here. I'll probably show that at the end if I've got some time while I'm answering questions. But yeah, his butler, Yamaoka, is definitely his sort of guiding influence in his life. Due to having an awful relationship with his parents, he's definitely not one of my favourite characters. However, there's a scene that sort of represents his sort of turning point, where you can see it's the real core of where you can see where his growth is, how it's changed him over the course of the game. And there's a line that he says that is probably one of my favourite lines in the game, but I won't go into things. And finally, he has a loose connection with the game's main villain, Takehisa Kandori. I've got here that I'll cover him later. I unfortunately ran out of time because I was at work a lot this last couple of days and forgot to put a slide in for him, but I will talk about him a bit at the end. But yeah, due to him being the heir to a big corporation, and Kandori is the branch manager of Sebek in the city. He has a very brief history with him, and a bit of a back and forth between them occurs. Next, before I continue, the 4 characters that I've just talked about, the protagonist, Maki, Mark, and Nanjo, are all mandatory characters for the Sebek route. You have to have those 4 with you at all time. And then for your 5th party member, you will have multiple points throughout the game where they'll go, hey, can I join you guys? And you can say yes or no. You can only have one other person with you, and they stick with you for the whole route. So if you pick up the first person you can get, you won't be able to get anybody else, which means that if you want to see everybody, you have to play through that route, I think 4 or 5 times. So the next character is Reiji Kido, and I feel like he is the secret character, and he's quite tricky to unlock on the Sebek route, but he is definitely the sort of, he at least to me, he feels like the one you should go for the most story content, because his character arc does kind of weave into the main plot more than a lot of the others. He is a bit hard to unlock. You have to trigger a lot of flags in the early game that are very obscure, talking to faceless NPCs in a certain order, and you have to play through a good majority. Well, no, not the majority of the game, but you have to play through quite a bit of the game until he joins you. However, the payoff is very good, as he is a badass and he will kick everyone and anyone's ass. But character-wise, I can't say an awful lot, because as he only turns up later on, all of his stuff is more spoilerific, but he's a very antisocial and sort of delinquent transfer student. He's got a very silent rage berserker sort of personality going on, where he and he has some sort of mysterious vendetta against Kandori. Throughout the manga, when you see him early on, and for the very brief times you see him in the games, he's constantly going, "Oh, I'll get that Kandori." But the next character, who is probably my favourite character in Persona 1, is Eriko Kirishima. Yeah, said that right. She's a very, very fun character, especially in the manga. She appears very ladylike and refined at first. However, you do find out that she's kind of a nut job. She's very much into the occult and like very, very toony. Like when she first gets her persona and shows up and is like, "Don't worry, guys, I'll help you." She does like a little Sentai style speech of like how she's the goddess of victory and how her and Nikkei will come and save everyone like from the demons, not knowing that they also have personas, and she gets a little bit disappointed that like everybody already knows what a persona is and are not impressed by hers. But yeah, she's often excited by like just the concept of demons and everything that goes on through the story. She's kind of get like starry-eyed and is like, "Oh, like there's the demon so and so," and like sort of like goes on like a little rant about them. And like for another example is like she already knows about the Persona game, which I will get to when I go over the opening parts of the story. Oh, and she in general is very ballsy and sort of like it just very. It really doesn't feel like she understands the gravity of the situation a lot of the times because of how excited she is. Like, she hears demons are outside, like, the school when they're taking shelter in there, and before she even has a persona, she's like, don't worry, I'll go exploring, I'm pretty handy with a sword. And, like, while exploring the city, she's like, "Oh, it's completely empty, this is so eerie, it's just like a Stephen King novel," and is very excited about that fact, which is a little bit worrying. She's if you've ever played Danganronpa 2, she's definitely got a lot of Sonya Nevermind character traits in her. And yeah, like another thing is during one of the bosses in the game, in the manga, she gets petrified and turned to stone. And after the fight, when they cure her, she like everyone's like, "Oh, thanks for saving us." And meanwhile, Eriko is being like, "Oh, I wish you could have left me until last or something. Like, I was quite enjoying that experience. It's so novel." But yeah, definitely a really fun character. I enjoyed reading like about her, reading the manga sort of thing for her. That might be because the manga gives her a lot more screen time and relevance compared to the game. Like, I mean, she is an optional party member in the game, while she's in quite a lot of scenes and like quite relevant in the manga. But yeah, next we'll move on to Hidehiko. Or Brown. Hidehiko, unfortunately, doesn't have a lot to him. He is Class Clown 2.0. Like, he's not the same as Mark. He's probably closer to, like, a Yosuke-style character. Like Yosuke or Riju. Like, he's definitely that sort of type. But yeah, and because of that, he doesn't... He does get a bit overshadowed. He doesn't... Like, you could remove him from the story, and you wouldn't really lose out on anything other than him as a character. He doesn't bring anything to the main narrative, but like not every character really has to. His general deal is that he's a very sort of jokey, like happy-go-lucky person and has an overabundance of self-confidence. However, that's all to mask the fact that he's a nervous wreck and he hates getting laughed at, and like you get like scenes of like him as like when he was younger. He's very much traumatized by his middle school bullying. So because of all of that, he kind of uses humor and his class clownness to kind of deal with everything in life, which does kind of fit into like the theming of like the different masks that like how like every Persona game starts with a persona is a mask that one wears in the world to protect themselves from hardships. So yeah, like he does tie into that quite well compared to other characters. So I think that's quite good. Also, something that he does in the manga that I'm very... Oh god, I've really spelt negotiation wrong there, oops. In the manga, before he fully awakens his persona, he basically gets by himself by simply just demon negotiating his way through every single fight. And he basically teaches the rest of the party that is a possible solution. And I think that was a very good way of like sort of introducing that mechanic into the story of the manga. Finally, we've got the next two are the last two party members. These two in the manga do unfortunately get shafted a little bit. As I said earlier, there's the two routes, being the Sebek route and the Snow Queen quest is the second route. And these next two characters are the two mandatory party members that you have with you in the Snow Queen route, Snow Queen quest route. then the last 2 characters that you have in your party of 5, you can pick from a variety. So you need to play through the Snow Queen quest twice to play both, like to see every sort of piece of dialogue. But here we have Yuka Ayase. She does unfortunately get shafted in the manga. And that's because the author did try and combine both the Sebek route and the Snow Queen quest together into one, with varying levels of success I'll get into, but unfortunately, because the Snow Queen quest is kind of the second route, it does get left onto the... It's very much the B plot, and if one of the 2 need to be dropped temporarily to make a coherent story, it is the Snow Queen quest that does get pushed aside. But Yuka in general is kind of she's a Gyaru Kogal style type character. If you know what I guess the equivalent is like a Valley Girl, but like a Japanese version. But she's very blunt and self-centered. At least at the beginning of the game, but like does grow out throughout it. And she goes through her own, at least in the game, she goes through her own little like arc of like learning how she can't just live in the present for her entire life, and she's actually got to think about her future and whatnot. In the manga, she's kind of just there, unfortunately, but yeah, like she's still relevant to the story, just to a significantly lesser degree than usual. And then next and finally, we have Yukino. She, as I said before, is the other mandatory member to the Snow Queen quest. Story-wise, she is a reformed delinquent, thanks to their homeroom teacher, Miss Psycho. Is very level-headed and sort of like the big sister to the group. Feels like the actual leader compared to the main character, who doesn't really do anything and gets elected leader. Yukino doesn't get shafted quite as hard as Yuka, as she is in your party for the prologue section of the game, but just like Yuka, does kind of get pushed aside later on. But yeah, I'll explain more about that later. Moving on, so the game and the manga both start on a quote from a Chinese text that is the butterfly's dream, which is kind of been the basis for the Persona series ever since, and it's where the butterfly motif comes in, where like the save points in Persona 4 have that little butterfly, and like Lavenza appears as a butterfly in like one scene in Persona 5 Royal, and you see the butterfly like across the games at various points. So then after that, in the game, that quote is just on a bed of text while they conceptualize it in a scene in the manga. But then we cut to the gang are all preparing for the school festival, and Brown suggests doing something known as the Persona game, which is essentially Bloody Mary, but the outcome is that you see the future instead of Bloody Mary showing up. Basically, there's a bet between Brown and Mark about whether it will be real or not, so everyone decides to try it, and the result is a crying little girl appears in the room instead of their future selves, as Brown was expecting. And then Naoya, Mark, Nanjo, and Yukino are all hit by like bolts of lightning, and it's during that they get knocked out and they go into a dream, or at least a place in between dream and reality, and that's how we meet Philemon. Now, Philemon, to those who don't know, is Igor's master. He isn't really in Persona 3, 4, and 5. I think Persona 2 kind of explains that, but the nose, Igor, does show up here too, briefly. He's around about the middle of the manga. But, yeah, in this dream, Philemon asks all of the kids if they can tell him what their names are, and because they can all remember who they are in the pocket dimension that they're in, he congratulates them, and as a reward, grants them the power of Persona, and says that they're going to be needing it because there's some sort of like he warns them of some sort of trouble coming up ahead, and that's how they get their Persona powers. One small tidbit thing that I should mention is that the characters in Persona 1 are essentially all wild cards. They're not none of them are limited to one persona and can switch. They do have affinities to different arcana. So their main arcana is they have best affinity, where like they can use those personas. Like they get like stat boosts, I think. I don't know the specifics on the game because I read the manga instead and then watched a let's play for this because I was a little bit short on time. But yeah, there's personas that they can't use in battle if they have bad affinity, and that's sort of like, they kind of have like half the power of like a typical wildcard user. But yeah, after waking up, their teacher sends the four, Naoya, Mark, Nanjo, and Yukino, to the hospital to get themselves checked out. One, because they all suddenly passed out, and two, because she said that they should visit Maki, who is in the hospital, who's been there for 6 months at this point. However, upon visiting her, like after they've been checked out, she does end up panicking and going into this critical condition. She gets rushed off to an operating center while the gang will wait outside. And as they're waiting, there is an earthquake that goes down, and the entire section of the building completely vanishes with Maki in it. And during that time, the gang all decide to find out what the hell's going on, as you might... understandable as that is. And after exploring and going to see what's happening, this is where they find out that the hospital has been overrun with demons. And in an attempt to save Nanjo's butler, who followed him there because he was worried about him, as well as the hospital residents and themselves, they try their best to fight back, but this is before they realise that they have their personas, so it really doesn't go well. And then it's when their backs are up against the wall, specifically Naoya, being the main character, nearly dies. That's when they all summon their personas and realise that they have these powers that they can fight the demons back with. But after escaping the hospital, they do meet up with Eriko, who has gone off exploring on her own, and discovered that she's also awakened to her persona, and while she was roaming the streets, she actually encountered Maki's mom, who is a scientist who works for the Sebek Corporation, who was wandering the streets injured, and she explains to everyone that President Kandori is the one who's causing all of these demons to appear. But unfortunately, since Maki's mom is injured and they're all kind of shaken up over the events, they do head back to the school to recuperate and devise a plan with what they're going to be doing. And this is where the game would normally split into two separate story routes. There's the Sebek route, which is the main one, where they try and stop the demons in Kandori with what's going on, while also trying to find out what happened to Maki. Whilst the Snow Queen quest is that the school gets completely frozen and warped and sort of becomes like a huge dungeon, very similar to like Tartarus, becomes its own dungeon within itself. And they have to defeat the Snow Queen's guardians to get to her and turn the school back to normal. As I mentioned before, the manga does attempt to fuse these two stories together into a single like narrative, and it does a fairly okay job. There's several small scenes from the Snow Queen quest that littered throughout the manga, like here and there, like not anything major, that like stuff that you could take out of it and place somewhere else. And then later on, towards like the back end of the manga, there is a point where the kids all get, instead of where in the game they teleport from one place to another, they in the manga make a pit stop essentially at the frozen school instead. And what ends up happening is they kind of blitz through the Snow Queen quest in about 2 or 3 chapters, or at least they do part of it, and then they kind of leave, and it's kind of implied that you can kind of handle the rest off screen. I commend the author for what they were trying to do, but the actual implementation of the Snow Queen quest is kind of weak. But yeah, like I think it's still cool that they managed to work those in. Now, finally, what the manga does well, and what's specifically about the manga that I think is good that the game is either lacking, or at least the manga is enhanced by, or rather is enhanced in the manga at least. Yeah, outside of a few minor changes here and there for the first volume, and it, for the most part, as it continues, there's not really too many things that are changed or cut, but there are a few. But for the most part, it does adapt pretty much the entire, like, there's not an awful lot that is missing. And there's also some new scenes that sort of act as a little bit of, I wouldn't say filler, but like sort of are used to help the, like sort of add little bits here and there that aren't necessarily essential, but help just flesh out everything a little bit. There is a few things that are lost throughout the game, or throughout the manga, however. For instance, in the manga, they never go to the police station to get weapons. And there is a scene with Mark where he's talking to, I believe it's the chief of police, who, due to his run-ins with the police because of his graffiti, kind of knows, but like the chief of police kind of nose mark as well and realizes that he isn't actually a bad person. He's just a little bit of a troublemaker, but he is good-natured. So like you have like that sort of world building and character building that's kind of lost. But I don't really feel like there's too many of those. Something else the manga does quite well is characterization in general. I really feel like it does a much better job at like just getting the personality across of the characters. The game unfortunately only has a single portrait for each character. Certain characters, if like they have changed clothes or something, will get a new portrait. But for the most part, there's no expression in like changed expressions in the portraits. So because of that, you're kind of relying solely on text to get that sort of across. The manga, on the flip side, due to it being every single panel being its own individually drawn thing, doesn't have that problem, and I'm a really big fan of like the art in general. But yeah, and stuff like certain NPCs that don't usually have a face, they have more place in the like they're more of a thing in the world. They're not just faceless sprites that you like inhabit the world. They do have a bit of a presence there. But from a single run through the manga feels a lot more complete than a single playthrough of the game. As I said before, that like the party just capping out at 5 people means that you don't get to see a lot of the cast who are very clearly from the beginning and whatnot, are very clearly important to the story in some shape or form, and party members that can be with you, but you only get to take one of them on the Tibet route. And because of that, like playing the game once compared to reading the manga once, you do miss out on a lot of just the characters in general. So that's one thing that I do appreciate, because the manga just has a party of like 6 or 7 running around instead. So characters like Brown and Eriko and Reiji all get a chance to shine on a single read through. With, unfortunately, the downside is characters like Yuka don't get as much screen time. Finally, back to Naota. I said I'd get here. Naota? Naoya. Naoya, I really like as a protagonist in the manga. The author did a really good job at trying to represent them in a way that is true to the fact that they were silent protagonists and maybe very hands-off with a lot of the like stuff that's going on, but also made a character out of them. With it, like after his first encounter with Philemon, there's something about it that never really sits right with him, and he's constantly reflecting on Philemon's words. Like there's a specific line that Philemon says: "Within you there is many versions of yourself, one that's as kind and gentle as a god, and one that's cruel as a demon." And now Naoya throughout the manga is constantly thinking to himself, like, is there even a real me? Like he has this sort of there's some sort of doubt that's ingrained in him, and you do see like flashbacks of where that sort of begins, and it hinted at like you see a little bit at a time throughout the manga as it progresses. This is something that's also like backed up by like his classmates and stuff. He's like they comment on about how he, like after like the demons and the personas show up, they comment about how he's changed and he's very different to how he usually is, because now you're at a number of points goes very hot-blooded, sort of. He gets in there, like starts like when the demons first appear, like he takes a swing at one with a fire extinguisher, and there's like a scene where Naoya's like after a fight is just covered in blood, and everyone's like, are you okay? And he's like, yeah, I'm fine. As part of like that thing of like how you can pick, because he's a silent protagonist, and how you can pick who he is. Generally, he is very indecisive about his identity, and that's like something they tried to work in. And his character growth is less that he finds out what he wants to be, and more that he gains the will and desire to like make a difference and make a change. He finds that sort of drive to himself, and that's kind of what he gets instead. Part of his arc is done via introducing a new character who's original to the manga, known as Kazuya. I can't show any pictures of him because there's spoilers that pretty much in every single picture, like screenshot I can find of him. So unfortunately, just here's the cover of the first manga, like just to put something on screen. Kazuya is an interesting one. When he first shows up, I did roll my eyes because I wasn't sure how it was going to be handled. I thought it might be a little bit hokey. It seemed like a very typical character trope, like story trope, and I wasn't a big fan of it at first, and I was a bit worried about where it was going to go. However, in the end, it ended up being really natural, and it is directly tied into events that happened in the game as well, which is really nice. I like it was very, I mean, not to go into spoilers, like the way they wrapped it up does end with a scene that occurs in the game as well. Like, if I hadn't have known, like I found out, like I already knew that Kazuya was a original character in the manga when I was starting reading it, because I did a little bit of research because I was doing it for this panel. But if I hadn't known, I probably wouldn't have guessed that he was like OC content because of how well it was integrated. Also, this entire arc between Kazuya and Naoya interestingly line up with a couple of concepts that are in Persona 3 and 5, like 3, 4, and 5, despite this coming out like between 1996 and 2000, so those games wouldn't have been out yet. But yeah, I really enjoyed how like it was kind of a happy little accident that was like sort of retroactively like worked in like really well, and the later games haven't uncanonized this. This could, like, the manga could still work, you know, like with the rest of the games. Now, onto things that the manga probably doesn't do quite as well. There are a number of extra scenes that are added throughout the manga, as I mentioned earlier, which are implemented because, one, it helps the plot flow at a more natural pace. The other side of it being that it sort of adds a bit of better pacing, as like changing the format from video game to manga. Certain events, because you have like no gameplay section in between them, if you just had them in the manga, would be like, okay, we're going to go to this place, and then you turn the page and it's, okay, we're there. So there's several scenes that are like integrated at different points to try and sort of pace that a little bit better, which I think is done rather well for the most part. On the flip side, however, some of these scenes, or just normal scenes in the game in general, either like going from panel to panel or page to like, it's sometimes hard to follow what's happening in like action sequences in certain panels. Like, just in general, they can feel like they get a little bit incoherent at points. And on top of that, there's certain things like there's a couple of flashbacks that kind of start and like they're not introduced. Like, you're reading a normal page and then a flashback suddenly starts, and it's like, oh, wait, why is everybody wearing different clothes? And you realize that it's because it's set like a year beforehand or so, and then they'll cut back to present day and it's like it's a sudden cut as well, and it's like, oh okay, I guess we're back to the story. Doesn't happen too too often, but it did happen like 3 or 4 times, so I did feel like it's at least to me, so I felt it was worth bringing up. Now, something else that it doesn't do too well is, like, as I said, the Snow Queen quest is not implemented as well as I assumed when I started reading it, because I had heard that it was part of the story, and I really do feel like it might be that during the end of its publication they were trying to rush it out a little bit, because it is like the last 2 volumes that kind of feel like things are skipped over and whatnot. Okay, overall thoughts on the manga. I did really enjoy the general vibes and aesthetic to Persona 1 quite a lot. It's definitely very different to the newer Persona games, but it doesn't really feel like a typical SMT setting either. It does have like its like own identity, where it is kind of a blend between the two, but it really stands out in its own thing. And as I was reading it, I did have a couple of good laughs and chuckles and got hyped at certain moments. That being said, the cast of characters and the story the story's a little bit basic. Like, there is stuff going on, but like it's very much like the entire story, at least for the Sebek route, is we need to stop Kendori. There's nothing really ever that changes throughout it. Like, I think the entire events of the game and manga take place over like a day or 2. And on top of that, the cast definitely has some winners and losers, but they're definitely not my favorite cast of characters in an RPG. But yeah, like even the ones like Nanjo, who I'm not a big fan of, do have their moments, which I did appreciate. Now, is the manga a replacement for the game? It's not, or rather, the game, you definitely lose like a lot when you're converting one medium to another, especially when it's an interactive one. Luckily, because of that sort of structure that I mentioned of like Persona 1 only taking place over like a day or 2, like that's general sort of structure of how the game is presented to you. Like, it's not on a calendar system, and there isn't stuff like social links and side content that you do over that like period of time. Luckily, the Persona 1 manga gets away with it a little bit more than like the Persona 4 anime or the Persona 3 anime, where like those sort of concepts are not adapted too well. But luckily, like Persona 1 does do a good job of that, but it's still not perfect at doing it. And on top of that, while it does lose some stuff, I do feel like it actually gains a lot more in the conversion process. So it's, if you think that if you think Persona 1 is a little bit intimidating, or like you just don't want to play something quite as old and archaic as it, I do think the manga is a decent alternative. While it's not a replacement, it is something that you can go with instead. And like the benefit is, like, while like some of these changes are very subjective and some people might like them more or less than others, I know I'm very favourable, but I have spoken to people over the last few days who aren't as fond on the manga. One of the biggest benefits is it is very low commitment compared to the game. Like, I forgot to check how long to beat for Persona 1 before starting this, but that was something I meant to do. But like, you can probably blitz through the manga in an afternoon, while the game might take you a couple of afternoons of like solid playing to get through. I really feel like that's a really big gain for the manga in general. It sets up Persona 2, which the Persona 2 duology is something that, especially recently over the last year, I've seen a lot of praise for, and a lot more people are getting into. I really feel like that's probably considered, while I've not played it myself yet, I do plan on getting to it eventually. I do feel like Persona 2 is kind of the main draw to classic Persona. While Persona 1 is, while it's still good in its own right, is less so, and due to the fact that certain characters from Persona 1 do show up in 2, I do feel like the manga is a good way of getting that sort of background lore on those characters without having to play like a 30+ hour RPG, which is a bit of a big ask. But yeah, I think that's just about everything. Thanks for watching, everyone. Oh, something that's quite cool is the author, or mangaka, of the manga did play the American PS1 version of Persona 1 as like part of her research when doing the game. Writing the manga. And there's little Easter eggs, sort of, like she has her own sort of background idea of what the personality and sort of general story of like the American version of the protagonist would be, which I've got on screen there. And there's also stuff like, in a flashback, Mark is wearing a cap that resembles his cap in the American version of Persona 1 on the PlayStation 1, which I feel like considering we know this information, is very clearly like meant to be like a little Easter egg to that sort of thing, which is something that's quite cool. But yeah, thanks for watching, everyone, and